What's going on? It is Tuesday. Well, actually, it's Sunday, but you're watching this on Tuesday. I'm out here taking a stroll around the neighborhood during the storm. Figured it was as good a time as any, right? Anyway, let's talk about some new games, huh? The top game of the week is Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, which is going to come out on PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Series S and X. This is the latest entry in the long-running franchise by the developers at From Software. You know, the guys who made Dark Souls and Demon's Souls and Bloodborne. But Armored Core was like their first big thing. So they're back to it. I think it's probably been maybe 10 years since the last Armored Core game. So pretty excited. Next we got Fort Solis, which is a like a spooky kind of a horror game. I don't know if there's any fighting or anything in it. Like the trailer makes it seem like it's more like a walking sim kind of a game. But it looks interesting. Looks scary. So Fort Solis, maybe check it out. It's going to be on PC and PS5. So sorry Xbox, you don't get it. Then we have Immortals of Avium, or Avium, I don't know. It's a first-person shooter made by a bunch of people who used to work on Call of Duty and something else. Something else. Here's what they worked on. The name, it's on the screen. You see it. They've traded in their guns and bullets for hand gestures and magic missiles. And you basically go around shooting shit with your magic hands. I don't know, it looks interesting. It's a new property, those are always fun. But the trailer uses like a hip hop song. Watch, check it out. Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Like, it's like a fantasy setting, but you're listening to hip hop. Whatever. You gotta sell it to people somehow. Anyways, that's coming out on PC, PS5, and Series S and X. And then, what else we got? Oh, Blasphemous 2, my mom's favorite game, is gonna come out on PC, PS4, PS5, Switch, Xbox One, and Series S and X. This is a side-scrolling game, 2D side-scroller. Looks like a really fancy Super Nintendo game. The first one was good. The second one looks great. Gorgeous. Like a beautiful looking game. I can't wait to play it. And I hope you can either. Finally, we are going to talk about Ride 5 on PC, PS5, and Series S and X. That is a motorcycle racing game. Coming out just in time for the Gran Turismo game. They're not related, but they're both about racing. And all racing games are the same, right? So, anyway, motorcycle racing. It might be fun. Oh shit. Might be fun. Might not be fun. Might be good, might not be good. Just like everything in life. Might be good, might not be good. Alright, well I'm gonna get out of here. There's a big interview I got coming up with a buddy of mine named Ken. Here's the intro to that. I hope you'll watch it. It's about 40 minutes long, so take some time, but check it out. Alright, it's time to go. I'm not gonna let a little bit of rain bug me. Jesus Christ. Alright, I'm leaving. Bye. Okay, so let's talk about the notable title from 10 years ago, The Bureau, XCOM Declassified. Today I am with a friend of mine named Kenny Reyna, or Kenny, or Kenneth, whatever he wants to go by. You know somebody for 20 years and you still don't know which nickname they like the best. Hey, so yeah, enjoy this interview I did with him, where he talks about what it was like to work on the game, kind of a brief history, background on his work in the video game industry, what he's doing now, and what he thinks about Soul Calibur 2. Hey, what's going on? I'm here with my friend Ken, who worked on the game The Bureau, XCOM Declassified, which came out 10 years ago this week on PS3, PC, and Xbox 360. What's going on, Ken?
Hey, not much. I didn't realize it's been 10 years. We have our um Facebook group, I guess it is, where kind of the 2K Marin folks are talking, and yeah, I think there was a little bit of chatter about it, and somebody was like reviewing it and things like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you keep in contact with a lot of people from 2K?
A chunk of people, yeah, not like super regular contact, but it's sort of like, hey, what's going on? Scott Lagrosta, I think we both know, kind of hung out with, so he's definitely the one I keep in contact with the most. But people here and there.
Cool. Okay, so let's kind of go back. How you got your start in the gaming industry? Where you kind of got your foot in the door and kind of where it led to.
Sure. Yeah. I started as a tester. Temp tester at Activision in Santa Monica in the basement. Actually,
Oh, wow.
I don't think that exists anymore. It's been a very long time. Temp tester at Activision, and then from there got a full-time position at Sammy Studios down in San Diego in Carlsbad. And that's sort of, I worked my way there after a couple years, like two and a half years, I think, into being a designer, basically after doing stuff in Unreal at home, and kind of figuring out and kind of proving myself that way. So both combination of building the relationships and being able to have access to the people who are doing the work, the design work and programming work and all that, and then just having developing a skill set at home and making sure that it's like, okay, I can actually sit down and manipulate things in Unreal and understand what the heck is going on there. So the super quick version from there, basically was on Born Identity as my first. Wait, no. Is it Born Identity? No, it's not Born Identity.
Oh,
I lost it. Whatever the Born game was.
yeah, Born something.
Conspiracy?
Maybe it might have been Born Conspiracy. Yeah.
Anyway, people can look it up. So as a designer on that, the Activision bought Vivendi, bought Vivendi Games, which is who we were under eventually. And then I got laid off soon after that happened.
Yeah.
And then worked up at Double Helix in Orange County for a couple of years, then started work at 2K Marin, and then from 2K Marin it was at another temp gig at Sledgehammer Games. So
Okay.
that's kind of the super quick version.
Do you have a rundown of kind of some of the stuff you've worked on, or just name off some titles?
Yeah, sort of in reverse, and probably most well-known order. So I worked on actually another almost 10 years now. The Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, that was the thing. I was a designer on, multiplayer designer on that. And then the Bureau game. You're testing me. It's been a very long time since I've thought about some of these. Then it was a third person. Wow, you're super okay. Anyway, it's a sort of robot fighting game, and then
Robot fighting game. All right, I'll have to look that up.
there. I forget what it was. It was one of those things that was it's a Square Enix. No, it was a Square Enix or Capcom title. I forget. That it was always tactics, 3/4 view tactics, and then they made. I worked on the third person version of that. I'm sure it'll come to me.
Do you have a page on Moby Games? Can we look you up there?
I do. Yeah. So that's pretty accurate as far as I can tell. There might be one random thing missing there that I worked on for a few months, but yeah, that's the Moby Games.
I'll take a look and I'll just put a list on the.
Yeah, you can link it.
Yes, here's the.
I don't know if you want to do. I can model something here, and you can pop it up and post. Not to give you more work, but yeah.
It's all good. All right. So so we'll move on to the Bureau and your time at 2K. So this was obviously it's an XCOM game, and it had been a while since any XCOM game had come out. From what I was reading online, it seems that a few studios at 2K were kind of given a task to make an XCOM game, and then they were going to kind of choose which one they wanted to make out of the bunch or whatever. Is that kind of what you remember?
That's a good question. Probably, like, obviously, like, kind of being on the ground, you don't get like a huge like insight into like what the higher level ups are deciding, right? And you kind of just sort of get the orders, and then you kind of, maybe if you kind of back channels, like know somebody who's working at another studio, you go like, oh yeah, we're working on the same thing or something like that. So yeah, I think I had been hired, and I'd been working on the game for, I don't know, I'm going to just say a year. And then kind of a year in, then we kind of started to hear like, oh, hey, they're going to do a traditional, typical, tactics kind of style.
Do you know about what year you were? Do you know about what year you started working on the game?
2011. Let's see. But yeah, about 2011.
Okay.
So March 2011. So yeah, we'll go with that. It's pretty close to that. Yeah. So yeah, but then we were kind of working on that, and it was, when I was on it, it was a first person shooter, so it was in Unreal, was in the model, it was the team who had done BioShock 2, so a lot of the expertise and understanding of how to build a game was kind of based on that idea, right? Like there were still a good chunk of people, some people had left, like often happens, especially after game ships, but some people had left, but there was still a good chunk of people that had been working. 2K Marin was founded to work on BioShock 2.
Okay, right, because they were kind of like you guys were kind of connected to 2K Australia, maybe, or?
Yeah, so eventually what happened was, like, it became, like, I think we were technically like sister studios. It was a real mess if you start to look at it, but yeah, because it was basically, they were 2K Australia, and they were very, operating independently, doing their own thing. And then I think it was something weird, like it became like 2K Marin Australia or 2K Marin Canberra, and then yeah, so fairly early into the project we were working with them, but it was just like sister studio, like, oh, they rolled off this project and they're gonna work on this thing. So the idea was they were leading it. Sorry, I'm kind of trying to think back. The idea was they had a concept and they were doing it, right? And they kind of had these checkpoints of like, okay, like, we're going to help them, right? So that was the original idea. Is like the 2K Australia was, we were going to be helping them, and then something faltered in development. Like they basically couldn't meet milestones, right? Internal milestones. And then it flipped, right, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to be, 2K Marin would now be the lead studio and working on that. So
is that when it flipped over to you guys, was it still a first person shooter, or was that when it was okay?
Yeah, it was still a first person shooter. I can't. What's that again?
So when was the change? Because I know eventually it stopped being a first person shooter and it went into the more kind of third person tactics. When did that change? When the XCOM was announced, the other one?
Yeah. So it had, I think we had it been announced? I think it had been announced. Yes, that's the crazy thing. The first person game had been announced, and then it became a third person game, which is sort of wild. I'm sure you can kind of look up reaction to that, where I I would say the public confusion was just as as wild as the internal confusion. But and I'll be honest, I know why they did it. Like, it was one of those things where it was like, it was not working as a first person game. Like it was game development is always it's always a mess until like the ship date, basically. Like, you kind of know what you're working on roughly, but especially when it's something new, you're still trying to find what the game is, what's the game's kind of personality, what are the kind of micro and macro game loops and stuff like that, and those weren't falling into place. So that's why it kind of shifted to third person, right? Where it's sort of like, okay, like the decision was made, like, okay, we can still use a lot of our assets and still use a lot of the stuff that we've been working on, but we maybe if we got a little bit closer to kind of the original XCOM, the vibe of that, right, and it added kind of that perspective, right, which is, it's a crazy change. Like, it was one of those things, like, I don't think I have not heard of development since that's done something that dramatic on something announced, right? So I think that's the key, right? Because usually if it's announced, it's like, okay, this is the direction, right? Like kind of the things on rails, and this is the thing that's going into. But games change all the time, especially every time every studio is working on something, and things get killed all the time internally, but it's that's just the way it is. But
right, they just don't get announced a year in advance.
That's the biggest thing, right? Yeah, it got announced and they were like, oh, actually. And it kept getting delayed, right? So, and in general, right, I don't think it was ever given a public date, I think, until we had the like third person thing set. So, and internally we kept, you always have internal deadlines and milestones and things like that. And then ultimately, like, we were given more and more time. And then basically, I think we used to call it the 2K 2 months, right? Where it says like, just be 2 months, right? Just a little bit longer. No idea if that's still how they do things. So but then that was like, okay, this is a big enough change where like I think we were like given like 6 more months in addition to like whatever that 2 month thing is. So it was like, I think it may have ended up being like a year or something like that.
So how do those delays kind of affect work morale? How did it affect you, your whole like thing? Like at what point do you just want the game to be done? Like when are you over it, or is it always
that's almost a philosophical question there. I mean, I think there's a little bit of, it's always mixed, right? I think it's a little bit of a relief. That's like, okay, thank God I can work on whatever thing we were thinking needs a little more time to bake. We can do it. But at the same time, it's extending out, like, okay, especially if you're working a ton of overtime, you're like, oh gosh, okay, so I have 2 more months. I have 2 more months of this. This is potentially, right? It's kind of just depends on where you are in the process. So yeah, it's mixed, right? It is a like, okay, I have some time, like we have a better chance now of making this a better game, but at the same time, just sort of personally, right? It's like, okay, but I have a lot of work ahead of me now, right? And it may be another strain, right, on both my own mental health and also relationships and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah. Does that stress factor into the game itself, like either consciously or subconsciously? Like, do you feel like maybe things get missed because you've been working so much? Or
that's a good question. I mean, I will answer it more in a general way. Like, I think it's just proven, like, people just don't operate at like peak efficiency, right? If they've been doing super long days, 12, 14, 16 whatever hour days, like there is a time and a place for it. Like, I think there is a good time to like, okay, we're going to work couple weeks, maybe a month, right, to do these kind of crazy hours, but it's under good purpose. But I think when it enters kind of the death march territory, then that's when it gets rough, right? Where you're like, okay, I can't. This is not. I'm not working at peak efficiency, and I can't do any more overtime. No amount of overtime is really going to get this done any better, right? I just have to rest, right? So
yeah. No, that sounds rough. Definitely, as far as development goes, I can't imagine that kind of overtime. That must be insane. Was there ever a time where the thought was maybe to stop calling the game XCOM?
So if it was ever not going to be called XCOM, I don't think there was ever an idea that it was never that XCOM was going to be dropped entirely from it. But obviously, like, as we were developing, then the like more typical traditional XCOM game got announced. They were developing it, and actually I think they released even before we did, right?
Yeah, it came in like a year before this game.
A gut punch, but understandable, right? Like, they knew they was the studio that had known how to develop those games and hadn't had the same tumult, right, that our studio had. But yeah, I think there was like a marketing meeting or something like that where we knew it had to be something different, right? Like, we didn't know what something different would be, and that was kind of up to the marketing, right? Or it's like, hey, what makes the most sense, right? And that's how it became the Bureau, right? Bureau XCOM Declassified. I think it makes sense, right? And I think it took a while. It took a while to learn how to spell Bureau.
I still can't spell it.
I can't either. Like, I probably at this point I'd forgotten, but yeah, I mean, I think the unfortunate part is I think it's a really good idea. Like, I always thought 2K marketing did a really good job in a lot of things, but it was just we didn't have that kind of ingrained into a lot of what we were doing and thinking about and stuff like that. So we couldn't make the most of something like that, right? I think conceptually, right? Like, especially if you like a universe or you like a concept, you kind of do want it explored from a bunch of different angles. You kind of want to see like, oh, what is this? What, you know, what would this aspect of this world mean, right? And I think obviously, like if we were able to know like, hey, we're going to do a typical XCOM, but you're going to explore kind of what this type of world is and this type of thing is, right?
Yeah, because this was kind of like the origins of the whole XCOM.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that's sort of the 1950s aesthetic is definitely.
Yeah, kind of like a Madman kind of a look.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Did you so you said you were a designer on the game. What if any input did you have on that kind of the look or the tone or the story or anything like that?
So as a level designer, not a ton of like input on kind of like direction. You know, it was always like micro things where it's like, oh, if they had a line that said this, or if this, you know, this would be helpful here. But it was definitely more my responsibility to just make sure that, you know, it was flowing to the beats and the main story points that we had to hit, and obviously it was engaging, right? And fun, right? It's very funny. Like 2K Marin had this whole like, I did enjoy working there, right? I don't like how it ended, but I did enjoy working there, and a lot of it was because a lot of it was to me, it was like leveling up in terms of like understanding of like what video games are and how do you discuss video games. And you can kind of see, you know, in terms of like Bioshock 2 and things like that, like there's still a lot of like crazy concepts there, but the underlying like how do we think about games and what does it actually mean, right, is way different than I had experienced in previous studios, right? So
yeah, it's funny you brought that up because the what I call them the notable titles from last week was Gone Home, which kind of like almost changed things a lot in games as far as, you know, what a game could be. You know, it didn't need to be full of action or, you know, killing or anything like that. You could just experience a story, you know, kind of walking through an environment. I mean, I don't think, I would assume that didn't have any kind of feel or like any inspiration on Bureau, but I mean, as far as games go, what was your kind of thought on games like Gone Home?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you have to see, right? Gone Home was a bunch of X2K people, right? Like I know every person, I think all but like one person who worked on, you know, on that. And, you know, I know I worked really closely to Carlo, like we hung out, we played, it wasn't D&D. We were doing something else, but anyway, D&D like pen and paper RPGs. But a lot of it is, especially if people are super passionate about it and are thinking about games all the time, like there's a billion ideas that are always like getting knocked around. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Or it's like, oh, it had this thing and blah, blah, blah. You know, and I guess I think a lot of people do. A lot of people that play games, right, are always like, oh, it'd be great if we did blah, blah, blah. But I think the weird thing is here, right? Like you have people who are down in the trenches and understand like, oh, this is what it takes to make a game. And they kind of figured out, you know, both kind of conceptually and practically, like how like, okay, let's basically make a big swing and try to make a game ourselves. Like I have, you know, either they had the money or they had the ability to kind of reduce their expenses to zero, and or close to zero, and to be able to like, okay, we're going to take this amount of time and we're going to go make this, right? So all that to say, I think there is some of that, like you really look closely at some of the Bureau stuff and especially the Bioshock 2 stuff, right? Like there's definitely things in there where like it works because it's not shooting, right? It works because it's just sort of like, okay, experience, you know, look at this, right? Like I think that's something that I think those games are great, right? I think it's good to do. I'm even I don't play those games a ton, but I totally appreciate what they are and kind of pushing the medium forward and things like that. So I totally celebrate that experimentation. I think the hardest thing is, right, when you make something like that, like there's just this super practical side of it, right? It's like, how do we, like, you have a kid, I have a kid, like no way I would ever try to do that, right? Like you have to, usually when you look at something like that where it's like, oh man, they did this, it's amazing, there's some other support system there, right? Either like they found, you know, kind of an outside party to fund it, or they just family wise they can like I'm gonna live in the basement, that kind of thing, right? But it's a risk,
Suffer
right?
for the art or whatever.
Right, exactly, right. It could be a big personal risk, or sometimes not suffer, right? If they found the right funds and everything like
Yeah, that's
that,
true,
or just
yeah.
be able to do it. So, but yeah, you just don't know, right? Like there's a lot of great ideas out there, but it's hard to get the gumption, let's say, to make sure to do the personal sacrifice in order to ship it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to when the game comes out. So it's announced. I think it was April of 2013, and then it comes out in August of 2013. What was the feeling like at the studio? How was the game received? Did you get any feedback, good, bad, in between?
So we knew what the game was, right? Like it's one of those things. Like I don't think most game developers are pretty reticent to talk usually, because it's kind of beat into us. It's like, hey, you do not represent the company, don't talk about it, right? It's changing a little bit. I think it's a little bit different, but usually people are super tight-lipped about things.
Yeah.
We were not surprised by anything people said, positive or negative, right? We were kind of like, if anything, we were surprised. We are so hard on it. We were surprised when somebody said something maybe a little more positive than we. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad you like that. We thought it didn't work because of all these things, right? Yeah, and you also have to understand by that point, like we were being ground down pretty hard, right? Like it's definitely not the hardest working conditions, right? Like let's limit it to games. It's not the hardest working conditions in games, but it was still pretty rough, right?
Yeah.
And there were people leaving a lot. Like people definitely saw the writing on the wall. Like even before I started, like there were people who saw, oh, this is not going to get the support that they want, right? And I think the hope was we were going to get through this, right? This is the thing that we had been assigned by corporate 2K, and then we'd be able to then move on to the it got announced, the Richmond project, right? Like that was Project Richmond was this thing that was sort of a small, like Skunkworks, like 5 people team. I think it got as big as 5 people team, and that was the hope, right? They were like, okay, great, when we're done with this, we'll be able to work on that. But so many people, I think in that period of time as it was shipping, it was like so many people had left and so little resource, like they were not saying very explicitly, oh yes, the next thing you were working on is this thing. They're just kind of like, maybe. So when they're going,
yeah, we'll see what you got next.
It's a hard no, right? Like you really have to, if that's what you're hoping for, if you're not like 100% into what you're working on, unless there's like on the schedule time dedicated and you see things ramping up, like you have to assume that's a no, right?
Yeah.
And you have to kind of make your decisions based on that. And that was definitely a hard lesson for me, right? Because I would rather have not gotten laid off. I would have rather spent the time, even if I did get laid off, I should have been looking sooner.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you don't want to be caught off guard, but then suddenly they got the rug pulled out.
Right, exactly. So anyway, that's a pretty but I think that kind of represented what we were thinking, right? Like I shipped there was a follow-up to it, right? So I think we were, as much as in that period of time, even though the game hadn't shipped yet, we'd already kind of like, okay, like this is the thing that is going to ship. Okay, we have a commitment to do DLC, so we have to peel off a team, and that's what I had started working on.
So how soon? Oh Jesus! so door slammed. So how soon after, or how soon before the game shipped, do you start working on the DLC? Is it kind of?
It varies, and it's sort of like there's a team of whatever 200 people or something like that, right? And it sort of varies on who you are, right? Like the QA people are definitely like to the last minute, kind of things, and usually you'll have you have to stop touching it at some point as a designer, and it really has to start going into like bug fixing mode, and like, okay, people are testing it and running through it and doing that, and then engineers, right, are making sure that's like, okay, like this is a weird fix, like, or this is a weird thing, like let's figure out what the bug is, if this is something that we're going to be able to ship with or not ship with, or and optimize and things like that. But the closer it gets to ship, fewer and fewer hands are touching it, but you still have the 200 plus people that have been working on it, so they need something to do. So that's often where DLC stuff comes in, right, where it's not it's not an on-off switch, right? It's a ramping down and a ramping up, so you kind of have that transition point. So I wish I remembered, right? But I think when it was announced, I think I had already been trying to or the ship date had been announced, I had already been transitioned to DLC because it was the parts that I was responsible for, the levels I was responsible for, were in the like stop touching it point, right? Like it is what it is. I think we always used to talk about, it's like we're not done. We just get it taken away from us. Like there's always more you want to do. There's always more like, oh, I can do this little thing, and sometimes you'll be brought back to like, oh, hey, fix this bug. Like you understand this like intricate thing you did, just like fix this one bug and get out, right? And that's a little bit of the discipline as well. Like, hey, like as much as I would like to take my time to do changes and things I need to do, like for the good and possibility of it ever shipping, like you have to be super disciplined about not following, not touching things that you're not supposed to be touching that would endanger the game shipping.
Okay, so where we left, we were talking about the release of the game. People were not really into it, but they also didn't seem to hate it, I guess. But so why wasn't there a follow up? Like, what happened with 2K Marin? Like, I believe there's a whole story there.
There is, yeah. We had kind of talked about, I don't know if you wanted to recommend the book, but a lot of the trajectory of 2K Marin is covered in Vision Schreier's the book, the press reset. Not to like promote his book, but it's like it's actually a pretty good representation if people want a kind of a deeper dive. But that said, but basically they closed the studio, right? Like the DLC shipped and they closed the studio, and some people got pulled off to go to Hangar 13, what became Hangar 13, and other people were just laid off. Most people were laid off. So yeah, even I think we were still around, like it did not do well enough commercially or critically to justify a sequel, right?
Yeah.
Something else I was going to say there. Anyway, that's the short version.
I know you worked on the game a lot. Do you play it after that? Like, do you ever get enjoyment out of the things you work on, or is it just like I don't want to see this again ever?
That's a really good question. You definitely need some time away from it, right? Like, there's a little bit of like, oh gosh, I'm sick of staring at the back of this person. That's a good question. I think it would be interesting to kind of go back and play it now and see like, oh, right, do I remember how to play it? But also, right, like, oh, right, we were trying to do this thing or we were trying to do that thing, right? There's been a few people who were on the team that did basically streams, right, of them playing it through, right, and kind of like talking like, oh, right, it's this thing or there's that thing, right? No idea. So
is that kind of what happens when you play these games? You're like, well, there's the thing I wanted to do, but we didn't have time, or oh god, that I don't like the way that hat looks, or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think there's always a ton of stuff like that, right? Where it's sort of like, oh, right, especially now, it'd probably be one of those things where it'd be like, oh, right, we were trying to blah 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 blah, like that type of thing, or. I think you also have instances of like, oh, this actually, like this sequence or this thing or this mechanic or whatever turned out better than I thought, right? Like, because you're staring at something for so freaking long that you start only seeing the faults and the warts and all of that kind of stuff, that it's hard to kind of pull back and give yourself a perspective of like, oh yeah, this is actually pretty good, or this is it's actually not a terrible thing, right? As much as you may have been because you're trying to refine it and get it as good as possible, so you do tend to focus a little bit more on the faults. So
yeah. Okay, so 2K is done. You're laid off, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately. I don't know. What did you do after you left 2K?
I think I took the time to play GTA 5.
As you should. It was a good game.
Yeah. So yeah, it was. So yeah, I think I played through that. Yeah, I was looking for work, right? For sure. I was, kind of had to get myself on a schedule, and I think when I didn't have a job to go into, it was like, oh, okay, I have to set my own schedule and kind of keep the discipline to like apply to stuff and kind of reach out, and that's its own grind, right? Is figuring out like that kind of stuff. I got married in that time, now that I'm thinking about it, so that was a good thing. Yeah.
That's right, you did.
Yeah. So, that was a particularly you know your partner's ride or die when you're both unemployed, and you're like, no, we should totally, like, this is the time to get married. Like, okay. Anyway, so yeah, so I got married in that time, and then got the contract gig at Sledgehammer Games, working on Advanced Warfare, right? And I basically shipped Advanced Warfare there, if I remember correctly. For the time, I had a lot of, it was a short-term like contract gig, but I think happened to be there right when they were shipping, like they needed the help. So.
And I think that was your last kind of game, or for the industry. You moved on to something else after that, right?
Right. Yeah. So I that was my last thing, and then I knew somebody, actually. It's a good note, back from my Sammy Studios days that I had worked with, and I just had kind of kept in contact with him, and I was like, oh, I like saw this job that was interesting at a startup that they needed a game designer, but it's a robotics company. So the robotics company is Anki. And I started there as a game designer, and then it kind of like morphed into, you know, kind of these other weird like kind of product roles, and got more into the like tech world of things, I guess. But yeah, that was a ton of fun. You know, I definitely was applying principles that I had learned from, you know, the previous 10 plus years of game design, but it would have expanded out, right, to a lot of other things. And that kind of I'm going to say that kind of cemented it as well, in terms of like, unless it's sort of some once in a lifetime type of project, that I couldn't see myself getting back into games, right? It would have to be a very,
because of the volatility of it all.
Yeah, the volatility of it all, like since a lot of people want to be there, like the same skill set like gets applied somewhere else, and you know, your wages go up, right? Like because of that. And yeah, I'm not, I would say I'm not an independently wealthy person, don't come from money or anything like that. So it's like, I gotta work, I gotta make some money, right? So yeah, I mean, as much as I enjoyed it, and I loved the like moment to moment work, and like the camaraderie of it, and like this the figuring out like weird problems and things like that, it's definitely one of those things that it's definitely one of those things where it's like, I don't imagine there's ever a scenario where I'm like, okay, I'm going to get back into this, right? It's like, okay, this makes sense. There's just other, you know, life goals and kind of things that have kind of become more significant for me, right? Than getting back into games or anything like that. And, you know, I still play games and stuff like that, but and I still play with people who are in the games industry. But there's never anything that they're saying that I'm like, oh man, I'm missed on that.
Right, that sounds great. You worked until 3 a.m. for the last 6 days.
Yeah, you know, and I think that the industry has gotten more sane, right? Like for the most part, I think there's fewer and fewer kind of like old school people, right, that are there that are just like thinking you have to grind things out, right? Sometimes you have to work a lot, but it's just there's this well understood ideas that you just do not get the best from people when you're grinding out, you know, doing death marches and stuff like that.
Cool. Well, okay, so this will be our last thing. Thank you again for talking to me. This was great. I really appreciate your time. So one thing that I like to do in the article is I talk about the notable titles. That's why we're talking now, because Bureau is 10 years old. So just want to quickly go over some of these other older games, see if you have any thoughts on them, your memories or anything. So we'll go back 20 years to 2003, and Soul Calibur 2 came out on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. And I don't know if you remember, but each one had its own separate character.
That's right. Now this is where I try to remember.
Can you name them?
Let's see. Vader was on Xbox. Is that right?
Well, that was Soul Calibur 3.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Link was the Nintendo one.
Mm-hmm.
What was the PlayStation one?
It's a Tekken character.
No, it wasn't Law.
The PS2 character was Heihachi from Tekken. He had the hair, you know, the...
Right, yeah. The hair. I can almost do that. I should really like try to... Anyway.
Oh yeah, we could like build you like a thing. You can put it on, looking like a Lobot from Empire Strikes Back, but with like angled hair. Sorry. And then the Xbox character was Spawn. Do you remember Spawn?
Oh right, yeah. No, I totally remember Spawn.
Yeah.
So just obviously off the top of my dome, like I remember that being like fascinating to me, right? That I was like, oh, that's cool. Like they're doing it for, you know, because usually it's like, oh, it's exactly the same on all all of the consoles. But yeah, I played it a ton with friends and things like that. So, but I never was not entering competitions or anything like that. But yeah, it was fun, right? I think I super annoyed my friends with Voldo, just because he was weird.
Yeah, he's the one with the big claws, right? You kind of spin around.
The claws, and he kind of does this like back bend kind of thing. It's like so that was my guy.
Yeah, cool. Okay, 1993, we had Final Fight 2 on the Super Nintendo. Did you play the Final Fight games growing up?
I remember I definitely play the Final Fight games. Most of my Final Fight memories are definitely in the arcade, so that might have been one of those things where I like rented it from Blockbuster. How's that for dating myself? That I was just like, oh, okay, that's cool. But yeah, I think just mostly seared into the Hagar and pile drivers. That's my memory, right? Hagar, pile drivers, and it being freaking impossible. But that's
I don't think I ever played Final Fight 2 when I was looking back on it, because it didn't come out in the arcades. It was like strictly a console exclusive. And so I'm like you, like all my memories of Final Fight are the arcade, like playing a 7-Eleven or something.
Yeah, but I mean, I love that game enough where like I'm sure I played it, right? But I don't have like a distinct memory of it or anything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's all. Ken.
Okay.
That was great. This was awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
Thank you so much for talking, and I guess we'll have to catch up another time.
That sounds good, man. Yeah, you're quite welcome. Yeah, this was fun to go down memory lane. So cool, man. All right, take it easy.
Bye, Ken. See ya. Hey, that was great talking to Ken. I really enjoyed that. Good guy, known him for a long time, and it's always nice seeing people you know, and hearing him talk about his work is just fascinating. Obviously, I love video games. Getting to hear somebody talk about a game that they made is just interesting. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we're gonna move on to another notable title. You know, if I ever need a ex-wrestler turned mayor turned street vigilante, I'm going to call Mike Hager. Alright, let's talk about the notable title Final Fight 2, which came out on the Super Nintendo 30 years ago in August of 1993. This was, of course, a sequel to Final Fight, the 1989 arcade game that was itself a spin-off of the Street Fighter franchise. In case you missed the opening, the story of Final Fight 2 is that all the characters from the first game, Cody, Guy, and Mike, have kind of moved on from beating the Mad Gear gang, and Cody and his girlfriend go on a vacation, as you do after you've been kidnapped, and Guy goes off to continue his training because, you know, he's like the world's greatest martial artist or whatever, and Hager just goes back to being mayor. Well, you know, the Mad Gear gang is pretty pissed, and so they reform, and they decide to kidnap Guy's fiance and, master, and this pisses off the sister of Guy's fiance, a woman named Maki, who goes to Mike and tells him that she needs his help in defeating the Mad Gear Gang and rescuing her sister and Guy and her's master. The two of them are joined by an old friend of Mike Hager's, a Japanese man named Carlos Miyamoto. And I don't want to get too, stereotypical here, but I don't know a lot of Japanese dudes named Carlos. But this is where we are. I guess according to his bio, he did grow up in Mexico studying different types of martial arts. So I guess that's where that comes from. That makes sense. Hey, that's all I need. All you need to tell me is you grew up in Mexico, and I accept it. So anyway, the three of them get together and they travel around the world, going to different locations in Europe and Asia, looking for clues on the whereabouts of the Mad Gear Gang's final boss in order to save Maki's sister and master. The gameplay in Final Fight 2 is basically unchanged from the first game. You choose one of three characters, you move around different stages, just beating up dudes left and right. And I think it's literally only dudes. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page here, and it says that 2 female characters from the Japanese version of the game were removed and replaced with male characters. I don't know why. Do they not want you to beat up women in America? And now that I say that out loud, that sounded awful, but anyway. Yeah, they were replaced with dudes. So yeah, fuck men, fuck us. We deserve to get beat up. Anyway, this is getting a little too political. Let's just move on from that. Where am I going here? Oh right, the reception to the game. The critics, they didn't really love this game. I don't think they hated it. But it wasn't universally loved by most of the gaming outlets of the day. They were mostly just kind of disappointed that Final Fight 2 was nothing but a rehash of the first game. Same gameplay, same move sets. They're essentially the same 3 characters. You replace Guy with Maki and Cody with Carlos. And, there's just not much there. I guess Carlos had a sword, but whatever. Yeah, it's still a fun game. They still enjoyed playing it. Critics did. But they wanted a little bit more. And I guess they didn't get it from Final Fight 2. Players, though, they seem to love the game, where it sold over 1 million copies worldwide. It is phenomenal for 1993, Good sales for a good game. Critics be damned sometimes. Final Fight 2 is a lot of fun, and you should check it out. I highly, highly recommend it.